Tony, a 30-year-old businessman, had an old ancestral home in Ravenswood, a small village near a city in the Midwest. Since childhood, his father had kept him away from Ravenswood, saying it was a cursed place. But Tony was curious to see the large house he had only heard about. On a business trip to the nearby city, Tony decided to visit Ravenswood. There was no mention of Ravenswood on any maps, so Tony asked around and finally found the way. When he arrived, it was only 7 in the evening, but the village looked abandoned. Tony noticed something strange. Every house had 2 doors, a large door and a small door, and the small door of each house was left open. Tony's uncle still lived in their ancestral home in Ravenswood. Tony went straight to his uncle's house where the large door was shut. He knocked, but no one answered, so he entered through the small door and closed it behind him. Inside, his uncle welcomed him warmly. They sat down in the living room and began talking. Suddenly, loud bells rang out across the village. Tony asked his uncle why the bells were ringing and why the village was so empty. His uncle explained that Ravenswood was cursed. Every Tuesday at exactly 7:15 p.m., a ghost named Dreadfoot roamed the village. To avoid his curse, the small doors of every house had to be kept open. If someone closed the door, they would be cursed by Dreadfoot, becoming hunchbacked and dying within 13 days. Tony's heart sank as he remembered that he had closed the small door behind him. He jumped up to open it, but the clock tower struck 7:15, and a strong wind began to blow. The sound of buzzing mosquitoes filled the air. His uncle realized Dreadfoot was already in the village. As Tony reached for the small door, it was too late. Someone or something began knocking loudly on it. His uncle whispered, "Dreadfoot is here." Before they could react, the small door flew open on its own. Tony froze in terror as he saw a pair of rotten, small blue feet hovering above the ground, surrounded by a cloud of mosquitoes. Dreadfoot, with his red, glowing eyes, tangled hair, and decayed blue body, rushed toward Tony, kicking him so hard that Tony fell unconscious. When Tony awoke, the villagers were around him. He felt intense pain in his back. When he touched it, he found a large, painful hump had formed. His uncle told him that, as the rightful owner of the house, Tony was now cursed by Dreadfoot and would die in 13 days. No one in Ravenswood was willing to help, fearing Dreadfoot's wrath. Desperate, Tony called his best friend Steve, who rushed to the village with a local priest. When they saw Tony, they were horrified. His body was covered in wounds, and the hump had grown larger. The priest began performing rituals to capture Dreadfoot, praying day and night, but Tony's condition only worsened. On the second night, the priest took Tony to a field where Dreadfoot was said to dwell. As they stood near an old scarecrow, a strong wind began to blow, and the buzzing returned. Suddenly, the scarecrow started shaking violently. Before anyone could react, Dreadfoot emerged, strangling the priest in seconds. Tony and Steve ran for their lives. Steve tried to drive Tony out of the village, but just as they were about to leave, their car broke down. The wind picked up, mosquitoes swarmed, and Dreadfoot appeared right in front of them. Steve tried to escape, but Dreadfoot chased him down and killed him in front of Tony's eyes. Dreadfoot was furious. For the next 7 days, he would drag Tony out of his home, throwing his hunchbacked body against the doors of different houses. The villagers wanted to help, but fear kept them from intervening. On the 13th day, at 7:15 p.m., the clock tower rang out again. The village fell silent as Dreadfoot roamed the streets. Soon after, a blood-curdling scream echoed through the village. Tony was dead, another victim of the curse that haunted Ravenswood. Please do like, comment, subscribe, and share for the next part.